All right, so hello everyone, it's Josh Silverman here from Constantly Calibrating. I'm here chatting with Jeromy Walsh of Soulbound Studios, which you may know from currently under Kickstarter, Chronicles of Elyria. How are you doing today, Jeromy?
I'm doing really well. It's Friday, and we are about $25,000 away from being successfully funded. So we're all very enthusiastic at the office today.
The energy is high because remind me, it was 900,000 was your original asking. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
So
900,000.
so 25,000 compared to 900,000. So that's almost like that's bordering on nothing. I mean, it's not nothing by any means, but when it's this far away from the end of the campaign. So out of curiosity, were you expecting to get funded within a week, pretty much, if I'm correct, or close to, just over a week?
No, I definitely not. There's no, yeah, that was way more subtle than I meant to be. No, we definitely weren't expecting to be funded this quickly. I think that the game that we are developing and the game that we are showing people is, I think it's divisive in some ways because we're doing so many things differently. There's so many new features. We kind of came into the Kickstarter expecting people to either like it or hate it. Or I should say love it or hate it. So we were kind of expecting either we would reach our funding at some point or we would just bomb and there'd be no interest at all and we would we wouldn't get over 20,000. Once we saw that that wasn't going to happen, that we weren't going to bomb, then we kind of suspected that we would be successful. But we wanted to maintain kind of this cautious optimism. We didn't want to get our hopes up and then see it flatline and not ultimately get successfully funded. So we've been very kind of low key about it. We've tried not to celebrate or anything like that. But that being said, even after that first day when it skyrocketed, we were still like blown out of the water at how successful it was, and you see a lot of these other games in the past that have reached their funding in, a day or 2 days or 3 days. And it's taken us about a week and a half. But, in spite of the fact that we have a very talented and experienced team of developers, we're largely unknown. And so we never expected that it would do this well in this short a period of time.
No, for sure. I mean, most of the campaigns that skyrocket seem to always be from like the big studios. Double Fine did something, Obsidian did something. Those are the ones you expect to just be instantly funded. So smaller or lesser known wouldn't always go that way. But it's been really cool because, well, okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. First off, what's the pitch on what is Chronicles of Elyria? Why did you expect it to potentially be divisive with people?
So Chronicles of Elyria is a new in development MMO, as people probably know by now, that really, it's an entirely new spin on the genre. It's effectively a rewrite of the MMORPG idea, and it was designed basically from the ground up over about 15 years of iterating on the design, constantly taking a look at what was out there and thinking about what we would do differently if we could solve the problem our own way. Just starting from scratch, we've come up with this new design, and I feel like we've solved a lot of problems that people have with the current genre and the current design for MMOs. Most importantly, I think, is just this feeling that when you get into a game, you don't really have any impact on the world. You can't leave your mark. It's not a real place. It feels like cardboard cutouts everywhere, and that you're in the world, but you're not with the world. It's not one and the same. And so a lot of the design elements that we have added are about making the world feel dynamic. It's about making the players that are supposed to be the heroes of the world truly heroic. We're actually forcing that upon them. We're not giving them the title of hero by default. They have to earn that through player and character actions. And so as a result of that, it's significantly more challenging than most MMOs that are out there, and it's also fair but not equitable. And I think that's one of the things that surprises people the most is that the rules are consistent and the rules apply to everybody, but not everybody enters the world, for example, at the same level. There are people who are going to come into the world as more or less peasants, while there's other people who come into the world as kings and queens, and it feels like there's a level of inequality there, and there is. And we did that because it's a sandbox world where the conflicts are largely player driven, and we provided those as an opportunity for conflict. We want the people to rally against the nobility and try and take the throne, and we want people to have to manage their kingdoms effectively. Also, it's kind of like our world. Not everybody is the same. It takes a wide variety of people to make the world run, and we really view Chronicles of Elyria more as a story world than as a theme park or sandbox game. It's a story game, and in any story, there are people in different roles and positions, and while you can change your lot in life, it's just part of the way the world works, that people exist in different roles. So that is one of those things that we feel like is going to be really divisive for people. And the other big one it's kind of like our tagline is that, we're the first MMO where characters age and permadie. And so you get into the game and you spend a year playing your character, and while your soul, kind of that part of your character that is really you, it has your memories, it has your experiences and things like that. While that can be reincarnated, and you get a chance to play that soul in multiple lifetimes, the character of that name, the person that you built, they're dead. The role in the story that they were going to play is over, and we feel like that catches people off guard as well. So those, I think, are the big two things: the inequality that exists in the world, and then the fact that your characters will die.
And then, I could see why people would be bothered by this, because it's not something we've experienced. I mean, as you said, you've been working on this for 15 years. You've been working on this idea since before there was even really a rebirth of MMOs, with World of Warcraft and stuff like that. You've had this at least gestating for quite some time now.
Mm-hmm.
You're just a man, just a woman in this world. Is there any guidance when somebody pops into the world? Okay, so you're jumping in as just a peasant. You're not a person who's on the Kickstarter. Who you're not backing at a Baron level or a king or queen level. You're just a guy who picks up the game and wants to play.
Uh-huh.
What is that starting experience do you expect to be like?
So we expect that starting experience to be fairly warm and welcoming. And the reason I say that is because in most MMOs, you go through character creation, you enter the world, and you're inside of this starter town. There's NPCs running around. There's 1,000 players, or however many just entered the game for the first time, all in one location. They're rushing to clear out the kobolds or whatever the starter minion is. There's a poke at Goldshire there. But they're rushing to clear out all what the starter minions are, and it really just feels like you're throwing in every man for themselves. Like, here's your adventure, go find it. And with Chronicles of Elyria, one of the important things is that during character creation, you select the family that you want to join. And that family can be an NPC family, or it can be a player family. And if it's a player family, then shortly after getting into the world, we expect your parents and siblings that you may have to come and greet you and to give you your starting pack and to tell you what their focus in the game is and give you the resources you need to get started. And they're the ones that help you identify what your role in the world is going to be, how you find things, where you find things, how you use your skills, where's the best place to go to learn to be this or to be that. And so we want it to really feel very collaborative and very welcoming and this is our world. You've joined the sandbox, but you're also now a part of the story. Let's help you figure out what your role in the story is going to be. So also, it's not a starter town. Depending upon which family you pick, could be really anywhere in the world, and you're going to know that ahead of time because there's a map, so you can choose to start in different locations. But then even once you get into your family, it could be that your family is part of a village. If that's the case, then you're now contributing to that village's goal. You're helping them to either harvest food, you're helping them to gather resources, you're working with them in construction of larger buildings and structures that are needed in the village in order to maintain its well-being and safety. And so you immediately have things to do. And it's not quests that every other person in the world has done. It's always you're moving towards something bigger because it's player-driven.
So, I mean, it seems like a community focus is really what you're looking for with this game. You want people to feel part of something bigger than themselves, kind of what we all hope for in our real lives, but to actually feel it in a video game thing. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that we've definitely designed this game to be a massively multiplayer game. And while the solo experience is there and people can choose to play it more like a solo or single player RPG, we've designed it from the ground up to really be about interacting on a large, massively multiplayer level, which I think is unique. As ironic as that might seem, I think most MMOs out there feel very much like a single player game or a massively multiplayer chat room inside of an instanced world. And this is very different. Just because from the ground up, the features have been designed to require multiple people working together.
Yeah, well, I mean, and nothing against the games I'm about to mention, but in my experience, for just in the more recent, it's popular still MMOs, that I play with World of Warcraft, I never had really an interest in doing anything with other people. I was in a guild, but that was really just maybe some chatting, but I never played with other people. Star Wars: The Old Republic, I personally despise playing with other people. That to me is a single player game that you pay a fee for, kind of experience. And then for me, my perfect MMO was Star Wars Galaxies, way, way back. And what's interesting about Chronicles of Elyria, it feels like parts of that game little bits are being reborn into Elyria. The choosing your path, not fully with a direction, leaving your mark on the world, and also community, because that was a game where community was key.
I've heard that a lot. I actually never played the Star Wars MMO, Star Wars Galaxies. So I actually can't draw a comparison, unfortunately. But I have heard that from a number of people, and I think it's good. I think that, I certainly don't claim to have a monopoly on good ideas. And I think that if we've seen that before in other MMOs that I didn't play, then I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to play them. At the same time, having not played them, it just further increased my desire to see it in a game. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing it now, is because some of us didn't have an opportunity to play in the games that supported those features. But yeah, we've heard that there are similarities there, which is good. Some of the stuff we do have similarities in a lot of games, but kind of the approach that we take with this is it's a whole new recipe. We're using a lot of ingredients that have been seen before. We're also using new ingredients that have never been seen before, like the aging and dying, and we combine them. And I think what we end up with is a new product that's never been seen before, or at least never been tasted quite this way.
Well, I know that the aging and dying, the legacy, families and things of that nature are all what initially drew me to Chronicles of Elyria when one of my writers pointed it out in our chat, I don't know, a couple months back. And it was always that that idea of leaving my mark on the world, because that's something that I've been obsessed with in the real world. I think most of us are obsessed with to an extent, is what is our legacy? What are we going to leave behind? So to have that in a game, yeah, it's going to be heartbreaking when I lose Cordus Vicaria in the first, but hey, there's always his, son or daughter, or, even someone in a different line to follow along with, with a soul.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that we're most excited about is that, there's never really been a video game where you get this human condition. You see your character effectively born, you see them grow old, they've got all their experiences of the life they've lived, their roles change in society, and then ultimately they die. And that's going to happen inevitably. There's nothing really that you can do about it. And so you have to constantly be afraid of that. You've got a limited amount of time to make your mark and to do the things that you're going to do. And that makes all of your choices in the game meaningful. And I think knowing that your character will pass away at some point and that the choices you make are meaningful, I think while a lot of people are concerned that that's going to make you feel less attached to your characters because you know that eventually they're going to move on, I think it makes you so much more attached to your characters because they become relatable. That's something that we share in common with our characters that we've never shared with them before.
Well, that's the thing is, some people just don't really get attached to fictional characters. There are plenty of people like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a person who, I played the Mass Effect series, obviously Constantly Calibrating. I think I played Mass Effect, and I became very attached to certain people, so when they died, I cried. But these were characters that I could have gone online and read a spoiler sheet that they die and ruined the experience, or it's a scripted thing. So again, that's just part of the experience. There was nothing really in my choices that necessarily dictated that. That's just how the story was going. With Elyria, it's most interesting, and I feel like I personally will have a connection because if my guy dies at a young age, then that's my fault. I made mistakes as a player. I didn't do something I should have done. Or if he dies of old age, then that also is my fault, but in a better way because I got my guy through his whole lifespan. Yeah,
and I'm actually really looking forward to the transition because, there are, cemeteries and graveyards and things like that in this world, much like there are in other fantasies. But this is the first game where you actually might see people gathering in the cemetery and giving last rites or saying goodbye to a character because, they're well known, they're well regarded within a village, and people want to honor that character. And, it does beg the question whether or not, once you reincarnate, whether you would attend your own funeral or not. But we're really looking forward to not just a game where there are weddings, because, that's been done before in some games, but this is really the first game where you can also have funerals.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. Like the realism aspect or the realism association is, well, okay, simply put, this game has, like, to me, the highest likelihood of having heavy role players and a lot of fan fiction written about individual characters. I'm just expecting your forums as this game launches to just be filled with people telling a log or a diary of their character from their character's perspective.
Yeah, we hope so. We also want to kind of take a broad level of view of that and put it in the game itself.
Sure.
Have a website that's constantly kind of updating, as the story unfolds to let people know what's happening in the different worlds and the different servers. So we want this to be a story that kind of writes itself. But yeah, no, I agree. I think that between the aging and dying, the fully skill-based system, the fact that the world isn't item-based, like your progression system is based on player skill and on not repetition per se, but on the things that you do, not necessarily in the items that you wear. Mm-hmm. And so people are going to be more inclined to dress the way that they want to, that feels like it meets the persona of their character and not feeling like they have to wear the tier 5 armor because that's the best that they can get, that sort of thing. And so we're giving that back to the players and letting them be the character that they want to be and not associating their progression with that. that level of customization and freedom, I think, is going to ultimately result in a lot more role play. Whether or not that's role play in the traditional, like, I'm going to be in character kind of thing, or if it just means more people getting into the role that their character plays in the world, whether or not they're actually in character or not. I definitely think that when we talk about this game, we talk about it about as the role that players are gonna take in the world. So it's definitely a role playing game in the traditional sense.
Well, that's an interesting distinction that I hadn't actually thought of. The idea of people, who literally are typing as their character in every conversation, everything, or just the people who are just fitting into, well, as you said, the role play of an RPG. I hadn't ever thought about that. But okay, I want to move on to the business side, another possibly controversial thing for some people. So the business model you guys are doing is you pay for a life, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that works is, if I'm correct, is it $30 a life?
The final price hasn't been set because we don't know yet. Yeah, the estimated price is about $30 for Spark of Life. We say estimated because ultimately the game that we develop is going to determine storage costs, ultimately server processing and bandwidth and those things. And so we'll have to make sure we set the Spark at a level where obviously we can make a profit still. So we don't know what it's going to be long term, but we, from our early estimations, think that that's about what it's going to be.
So essentially it's per life, and I think a lot of people at first were like, so wait, if I die, blah, 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 then I wasted $30 on a month of a game, that's so expensive. But from everything I've been reading, even if you're absolutely balls to the walls, just running out into danger, you're still unlikely to die, and that's because of how death works, or incapacitation works in the game, correct?
Yeah, so when people first hear that we have permadeath, they immediately think, "Oh my God, I die once, I fall off a cliff, I'm going to die, and then I have to pay another $30." And that's not the way the system works. The goal here is not to punish players for sucking or for being bad. The goal with this game is to make them make meaningful choices. They have to always consider whether or not they're prepared for the current circumstances or whether or not they need to go back and become prepared. It's also about making sure that people who have more power in the world have more meaningful choices. They have to be careful to a higher degree. It's ultimately all about risk and reward, and the higher your opportunity for reward, the higher the risk should be. And so the way it actually works is that you've got approximately 354 days average to live. And the reason that it's 354 days is it has to do with the average life of an Elyrian. It ends up being right about a year. It's between 10 and 14 months. It's genetic. Some families live a little bit longer. Some families live a little bit less. But it averages out to about 12 months. So you get those 354 days average. And then every time you die in the world with a 2.5-hour cooldown, which is one in-game day, so once a day, when you die, it shaves off 2 real-life days of your character's playtime. So if you died 100 times, all outside of those 2.5-hour cooldowns, that's 200 days that you've shaved off, which is a substantial amount of time, but it's not... Oh, hold on. That's my wife calling. It's a substantial amount of time, but you're still looking at having 4 or so months of play, even with all of those deaths. And this is not a game where you're going to go into a dungeon and you're going to wipe a bunch of times. And even if you did, it would all probably fall within a 2.5-hour cooldown window. But it's a game where you prepare for an encounter. There's if a world boss, I say spawns, but that's not the right term. But if a world boss manifests, it finds its way out of an underground cavern and sets its feet on the world and starts, rampaging across. It's not one of those things where people are going to just kind of go out and throw themselves wave after wave at this creature. Like, they're going to have to plan for it. They're going to have to set an ambush. They're going to have to, figure out where in the world is best to make the encounter happen. And then they're going to have to go in together and plan that and execute. So death means a lot more in this world. And we anticipate that if people play it correctly, that 100 deaths on a character is way high. We expect 10, 20, 30 deaths on a character if they play the characters the way that we expect them to.
Well, I imagine, you said it, depending people in power, people higher up. So as someone who's, a well-known adventurer who's going from town to town, city to city, fighting bandits, all this stuff will probably have a higher likelihood for deaths. While I imagine a blacksmith is going to have a far lower likelihood.
Of course, yeah. We really wanted it to we want the game to have a strong economy. And so one of the things that we tried to do with the game is make it so that the people who are back in town, who are staying relatively safe, who are providing kind of the foundation of the economy, they're suffering very little risk. So there's less reward overall. But they can be there and build up a strong economy and not have to worry about dying. So, the civilians, as we call them, the civilians are the ones who are likely going to live for those full 12 months, while the ones who are a little bit riskier, they go out and they adventure, even if they're still unknown, are going to die a little bit more frequently. They're going to live a little bit less, and that's okay too. But that's kind of how we get the heroes to be truly heroic. We like to talk about it in terms of a test. If everybody takes a test and everybody gets an A, it really doesn't tell you anything about the quality of the test takers, because everybody got an A. But if you increase the difficulty of the test, if you make it harder such that it spreads out the test results, and you get the A's and the B's and the C's and the D's, now you can really identify who the top tier, in this case, players are. And so by making the game more difficult, by associating risk and reward, by making it so that you lose those 2 days every time you die, it really thins that out, and you start to see who the real heroes in the world are.
That makes sense to me. So, okay, less likelihood of death if you're, a person crafting or a business owner back in town. But will people potentially die in the situations? Like, could a blacksmith hit themselves, try to do too difficult of whatever they're building and hit themselves in the head with a hammer and knock themselves unconscious, or someone, I don't know, a tailor stab themselves with a sewing needle and bleed out?
Yes, but not in the way you might think.
Okay.
We wanted the crafters to have an important part in the world as well. In fact, we designed the crafting system, or more importantly, the economics of the world, before we developed the combat system, because we suspect that a large percentage of the people are going to spend the majority of their time inside settlements, which is okay. We want that because that's where it's safe. That's where the survival mechanics don't take into effect. And so we wanted to make sure that in-town experience was very good. And part of that is also allowing people who are in town to also choose their level of risk. And so one of the things that you can do if you're a producer type is you can choose to research. So you can go into the UI, and as part of your crafting, let's say I'm crafting a sword, I can say, you know what, I'd like to discover how I make this blade lighter, or how I would make it faster, or how I would weight it so that it would, always land face down or blade down, or something like that. So you identify things you want to research through user interface prompts that we provide you, and then you can choose to spend some of your time while crafting that in research. And there's a little there's a little slider. The further to the right that slider goes, the more research and experimentation you do, the higher risk is associated with that. So if you're just being crazy, you're throwing all kinds of metals into the forge, and you're just trying to find a blade that's light as there. You could blow it up, and that could kill you. So there are risks associated with experimentation as well. The reward for that, while the adventurers are out taking high risks, are finding lost lore and ancient magics and like all kinds of stuff like that, the people in town who are taking the risks are learning new technology. And that's literally new technology introduced in the world, because every time the crafters move that bar to the right and they identify something that they would like to learn, it communicates to us, the developers, the direction that the community would like to go on that server and what kind of things that they would like to be introduced in the world. And so then we can go off on our side and we can make the assets and the animations and the mechanics that support the items that they're researching. And so every server will be different as a result of this. And those items that they brought into the world, they did so because they were willing to take those risks. So you could just as easily become the legendary blacksmith who discovered how to make, the first, quadruple folded blade that never loses durability. And for that, there's risks associated with that as well.
So essentially, okay, so on the server topic, so we're talking about where instead of servers essentially just being something that's a different name, or where there's more people, the queue's too long at this time of day, but it's better this time of day, or people are looking for those things. Someone might be looking at a server and be like, oh, that one, they've been more obsessed with like travel related stuff. So they have like the best horses and wagons and stuff like that. But this server, oh, they've been all about swordplay and things like that. They have the best swords. Like, could it be something like that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And it's a lot more than that too, because the servers are all randomly generated at launch. So even the terrain and world maps are different between them. The continents, the geography are entirely different. And so even if you were to be advancing the 10-year story that we have on one server, it's entirely possible that the other servers are in a different place in the story, or they took a different route on how to get from one point in the story to the next. So the world state, beyond just what kind of technology they have, is could be vastly different.
Okay. So you've mentioned a 10-year story. More details on that. Like, so is that just the game is planned for just a 10-year arc at this point?
So, any good project manager has to know when the project ends.
Sure.
We suspect that it will go beyond that, but we are working on a 10-year project plan. And ultimately what it means is we have the idea of a 10-year story, which we can divide up into basically books of about a year, and we can divide those up into chapters that are about a month long. And they're not fixed time lengths. The players have control of that, but we figure about how much content people will be able to consume in that amount of time given different things. And the idea is that at the end of a month, there are several different ways that you can exit from that story. It could be that one kingdom takes over another kingdom. It could be that the king dies. It could be that there's a typhoon. There are many different things that can happen. Although, to be fair, right now, natural disasters is a stretch goal, so I shouldn't say that. But what I can say is that transitions from one chapter to the next can be vastly different between the different servers. Now, we know what those transitions are in advance, though. We know that there's 5 or 6 ways to exit from this chapter into the next, and that's going to cause dramatic changes in the story, and it's going to cause the introduction of new NPCs, and it's going to cause the discovery of new relics, and all kinds of different things, all keyed off of kind of how the players end that chapter or that story. And it's our story director, which for the moment is me. I'm acting as a story director, but we'll be working to get a new story director at some point. We are the ones and the writers that work on what the 10-year plan is, as well as what the individual points, the milestones are. I guess you could call them waypoints, are along the way. But ultimately, it's the players that decide which direction they go at each of those crossroads. So we don't know from server to server which one they're going to do.
Okay, so you mentioned about because the players put stuff forward, players do that. Do you feel this game is? I mean, it seems it's a very intense game, a very realistic kind of plan. Is it open to both hardcore and casual and people in between, do you feel?
I don't like to use the word hardcore.
Okay, I don't either, but it's just
I understand your question.
It's an easy distinction.
It is. I think what I can say is that the game is catered towards a more mature audience, an audience who is going to be okay with the idea that there is inequality in the world. I think it's harder for a less mature audience to kind of handle.
For sure.
So I think that's going to be a more mature audience. I don't want to say older. I'm just going to say more mature. So I think it's really tailored to a more mature audience. We also have features like bolstering, which make it so that people who aren't online as much as other people can still stay at roughly the same level or can stay on par with their friends. So we're really trying to build this game for a community that has other responsibilities. They have a life. They have a family potentially and jobs. There's also things like OPCs, the offline player character system, that allows your character to remain in the world and do things even while you're offline. Mm-hmm. So I think all of those things suggest that the game is really designed for someone who can't spend more than a couple of hours a week in the game. But at the same time, the OPC script, the bolstering, and those things, they're really designed to make it so that people who aren't online all the time can stay competitive. But people who are online a lot of the time can get heavily involved in the story and can really they're the people that are going to make decisions about how the story evolves. So I hate to say that's really meant for one audience or another. I think it really caters to both in a way that no other MMO has done before. But yeah, beyond that, it's hard to say. Like I said, I don't like to use the term hardcore because that kind of implies that there are people who make this their life, so to speak,
sure,
or that they view, it's more serious than it is. It's definitely not built for a hardcore player. I will say that. It's not built for a hardcore player, but that doesn't mean a hardcore player won't find something here for themselves.
And okay, yeah, well, for me, 10 years or something ago, thereabouts, I was the person who would play whatever MMO I was playing or whatever game, I would play it obsessively, hours a day, poor health potentials, all that, horrible stuff that we've done. Now, I'm in my early 30s, I have a 16-month-old kid, and I'm a stay-at-home dad, aside from running a website and things like that. So it's a very drastic, I could see both sides of, again, the quote-unquote hardcore, the quote-unquote casual crowd. So it was just a curiosity thing, but yeah, it sounds like with bolstering, as you were mentioning, is one of the better things in the offline player characters, which that I think is one of the cooler things, because the closest I could think of an MMO ever having the offline player character would maybe be EVE Online with their skill learning, but this still seems like there's actual scripts involved. Your character's not just learning because X number of hours went by, but they're actually doing stuff in the world.
They are doing stuff in the world, and it's important, since you called out EVE. I actually did play EVE. One of the things that we've done with the offline player character system is that they can do things like travel, they can run a storefront, they can do pretty much anything in the world that an NPC can do. Because ultimately our long-term goal is that the player OPCs would actually replace the majority of NPCs in the world, save for a few exceptions here and there. But what we don't want offline player characters to be doing is to be developing skills. So it's actually the opposite of even some ways where, the longer you've been a player, the more skills you develop kind of automatically and over time. Here, you only really gain skills when you're online doing things. That being said, the bolstering system and the way skills develop in this game is really making it so that when you play with other people, the fact that you don't have as many skills as they, or that your attributes aren't as high, that's kind of negated. So you don't have to feel like you have to be online all the time in order to play with your friends.
Okay. Oh, so speaking of friends, so there's like about 4 more topics that I think shouldn't be too long that I'd like to tackle before we
Sure.
cut this. So one of the things you mentioned, friends. I've had I've been part of even though I haven't played with them in a video game for the most part in a long time, I've been part of a guild for about a decade now. And, I have my own site as well, which has its own grouping of people who are interested in this game. Now, how would we be able, will we be able to, and how would we be able to actually group up right off the bat in the game? Is there anything special about that?
Yeah. When we designed this game, I say we, it's mostly I, but there's we now, there's more of us now. When we designed the game, what we tried to do is take a look at the different audiences that were out there and cater to all of them in different ways. So that, there's the single player who's really excited about the game, or the casual who doesn't play very often but still wants to remain solo. There's the couples who play together, or the friend squad, that group of 3 to 6 people who always play together. And there are the larger guilds. And for each one of those, we've tried to develop an experience that caters to them. And so for the smaller couple, 2 people, 3 people, there's the family system. So you can get in, you can create a family, and you can kind of build up your house. You can expand it. You can literally increase the size and wealth of your noble house. And that's kind of what you'd expect to do. And you can put things on your land. You can run stores and stuff like that. Once you expand out into the friend squad, though, now what you're doing is you're talking about having multiple families that are likely nearby each other, because each of you says, I'm going to start a family in this region, I'm going to start a family there as well, and you all buy plots of land nearby one another, and you start to build a hamlet, 3 or more plots of land together with a well in the middle, and you can put a hamlet up. And then as you have your land, you can continue to buy land, and you can start putting buildings on the land that does things like taverns or inns, which provide food, so that when you're within proximity, you don't have to actually manually eat. It just kind of happens automatically and stuff like that. And you can put up walls, and you can put up a village square, and eventually a town hall. And as you build these things out, your little hamlet turns into a village, and then it turns into a town. And at that point, you are now one person, the mayor, and the other people who own lesser amounts of land in the area become either mayors or barons of that settlement. And so now you have this kind of RTS element to it, or like a town building element to it, because depending upon the buildings you place determines the passive and active bonuses that your little settlement gives. And people are going to be traveling through the world, and they're going to want to stop off at your settlement because of the services it provides. And you become a place that people want to be. You become a destination for them. But you build it out even further, and eventually you could become a city or even a capital. And capitals are so large they cover geographically the area of an entire county. And it's really just about bringing in more and more people to help establish the settlement. So you can start the game as family members, or you can just choose to start the game as families that are all positioned nearby each other and buy land and get settled.
So essentially, it's just really whatever your and your guild or your friend's personal strategy is. Do you just want to literally be family because you guys are a family, or do you want to form a town? I guess you could kind of say. I love that idea. I mean, already have my town name mentally picked out. No, I'm not saying it in the interview. I've made that mistake before. But I look, okay, dropping a little professionalism here, but I absolutely love this idea. The games like this is like, I think I have a journal of notes from when I wanted to be a game designer when I was about 9, 10 years old that my wife said she saw somewhere recently. She was looking through where I was describing my dream game, and you're making like 60% of the things that I wanted and thought were crazy ideas, 20 years ago. So yeah, a little professionally dropped there, but like I love hearing this. I'm bouncing my seat a little if it's not noticeable on camera.
I think that's why we ultimately did this. I think that, we all have this vision for a game that we wanted to play. It goes back to when I was back in the mid 2000s, I was actually at the Austin Game Developers Conference one year, and the focus was on massively multiplayer online role-playing games. And I remember hearing one of the speakers at one of the topics say, there are no new ideas. Everybody has had all the ideas before. It's just that they're too costly to implement, or we don't, it's all about implementation, and nobody has the skills to implement it for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And, I had this idea already for, 9 years. So at the time I was like, okay, well, it's inevitable. I don't have any resources. Somebody else is going to come along and make this game because all these ideas are too good, and somebody's already got them. So, there's nothing I can do. I can't compete with the larger developers. And, I'd already been a developer at that time, worked for a number of game studios. So, I knew what the cultures of those were, and I knew how much money they had. And, so I was just I put the project aside. And it wasn't until recent years when I looked around and realized that, whether or not the ideas had been had or not, nobody was doing it. And we're at a point in technology now where with cloud computing and scalable systems that, it's possible for a relatively cost-efficient model to start doing some of this stuff. And you add into it the fact that there are middleware packages now and really good game engines out of the box, Unreal, Unity, and those sorts of things that you can, in a cost-efficient way, develop a really good client as well. And so it just came down to if I have this idea and if I know other people have this idea and they're all excited about it and we all have this shared vision, all it really takes is one person to kind of take a risk and to do it. And so that's why my family and I said, you know what, we're going to do it. We're going to go all in. I left my previous company. I was working as a software engineer at Microsoft at the time. We left our company. We sold our land. We put all of our equity into the development of this. And when I say my land, this wasn't like farmland. This was the land that we bought that we were going to build our dream house on. And so we traded one dream for another. We said, you know what, we're gonna do it. We're gonna go all in and hope that there are other people in the world who have the same vision that we do and want to come along for the ride. And I haven't checked the Kickstarter in the last probably 30 minutes, but last I checked, there's 8,000 people almost, or 7,000, at least 7,000 people who share the same vision. So.
Well, I love that story, by the way. Just essentially, you sold off your home, your dream home, that vision to make a dream home for a bunch of gamers. And there's something really, I don't know, there's an interesting dichotomy of interest there that just, I love it. Okay, now here's the thing. You were talking about a very ambitious game here. Do you feel like for starters, you're asking enough money out of the Kickstarter, and do you feel like you can actually accomplish with that? Are you hoping for if it only like let's just say it only hits the 900,000 mark and just for some reason stops, nothing else in the next 20 days, which is unlikely since it started so soon, but let's just say that happens, would you be looking for outside investors? What goes on there?
So we're already looking for outside investors to a degree. I consult with people who are entrepreneurs because a lot of game developers, startups, don't approach it from an entrepreneurial perspective. And so for us, we put $500,000 into the idea phase of this project. Sure. That was enough to get us to a proof of concept, an offline combat demo. There's a lot of videos and concept out that we've been able to put out. We've got a lot of models and animations, and we're at a place now where we have a good representation of the idea. We also, as part of that, the next phase is friends and family. There are friends and family that we have that are certified investors who are matching us and adding in another $500,000. So that's not even funding that we've received yet. We don't have access to that because they're smartly waiting for the Kickstarter in order to help contribute. So we have another $500,000 beyond the Kickstarter to contribute to the project. The Kickstarter for us is our seed round in terms of investment parlance. It's a way for us to get seed funding. And the seed round for us is about taking this proof of concept that we have, this idea, and turning it into a feature complete product. And feature complete for us means our minimally viable game. It's our opportunity to get into the world, to play it, to have enough people inside the world that we can say that it is done. But most entrepreneurs, most investors at this point are looking at what we would consider a Series A, which is just beyond the seed round, where you take your existing functional proof of concept and you optimize for it, you scale it out, you build it out, you get it ready for production and things like that. So even at this point, we know we will eventually at some point have to go for a Series A so that we can take the fully completed game and scale it up and get it ready for production. So we haven't started that process yet, but we will be looking for additional certified investors, angels, and with the Series A, we may just choose another, not not Kickstarter. We won't be doing another Kickstarter, but there are other options on the table to provide equity in a company at a kind of a crowdfunding sort of way that allows people to actually invest in the company rather than just to get backing. So beyond Kickstarter, we're not going to be doing any more crowdfunding solely from a backing perspective, but there are other options for us in terms of trading equity for funding.
And I like that you're saying that actually, while the Kickstarter is still going on, there are a lot of people who do a Kickstarter and know they're going to be doing all of these things, but imply during the whole Kickstarter, nope, this is everything kind of thing. It's nice to actually hear, the honesty that, yeah, more money will be needed, but this is what we need for the base viable game.
Yeah, I think a lot of gamers get nervous when they hear this isn't everything we need in order to finish the project. So I mean, I want to be very clear. It's everything we need to finish the mechanics and gameplay features of it. But a lot goes into building a product like this in terms of server scale out, making sure there's instances, there's just production stuff. If we do box models, if we scale up the hardware for our website, there's localization costs if we try and go into other servers, other locales. There's Mac and Linux support, which is something that we're looking at as a stretch goal as well. So there are many things that come up even after the product is done. And we know that those things are going to have to be covered from additional funding. And if it were not a game industry thing, if this were any other enterprise, people would just go, oh, yeah, okay, well, you'll go for a Series A and you'll close the gap to get the rest of the way that you need there. But in games, I think people have a tendency to freak out and go, oh my God, my game's never going to ship because they don't have 100% of the money right now in order to get it out the door. But we are not nervous at all, especially now having done the Kickstarter, because I think a lot of people view this game as really innovative. And there was kind of a lot of raised eyebrows about whether or not people were going to support the idea or not. And I think people have made it very clear that they will support the idea. And so I have no doubt that we'll be able to take the success of the Kickstarter plus a solid business plan, plus whatever we end up with 6 to 8 months from now, when we are feature complete or already getting very close to feature complete, and can take that to an angel or other investors and say, all right, now we need to talk seriously about a Series A and how we get from where we are now to getting out the door. So we're confident we'll be able to close the gap, but it is true that we'll need to do more than just the Kickstarter.
Oh, cool. So I have so much more here. I think we only barely scratched the surface. We'll have to figure out another time to go through more things. But that being said, so the campaign will be done in just a couple of weeks. We're going to assume it's going to be funded at this point. What is then the plan from there leading up to launch? And when, obviously things change with development, but when do you expect, the earliest point that people can get their hands on something from Chronicles of Elyria?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, that's a common question.
Yes.
The cone of uncertainty is a term that you hear in game development and in software engineering a lot. The cone of uncertainty is this idea that the earlier in a project you are, the more uncertainty there is about when something is going to land down the road. Mm-hmm. And the further along you get in the project, the more accurate your estimates become. So at this point, it's difficult for us to say when things will be available because we don't even know at this point what our final funding is going to be from the Kickstarter or how many resources we'll be able to hire as a result of the funding. And of course, the more resources we hire up to a point, the more we can parallelize the development, and that will obviously speed up our production rate. So it's hard for us to give an exact date. What I can say is from a business practice, what we want to do is, because this game is so innovative, because there's so many features that are different than what you've seen out there before, there's a lot of untested, untried things. And so while we think it's fantastic, I know that you can get tunnel vision when you spend so much time with a project like this, and we want to make sure as early as possible that players get in and get to provide feedback and let us know for sure whether or not it is in fact fun and enjoyable. So I suspect that people will be pleasantly surprised about how early we let them into an Alpha 1, because we do want that player feedback even before feature complete. If we wait until the game is feature complete, the cost to change things, to make those alterations that make the game more fun, become infinitely more expensive. Yep. And so the earlier we get players into a rough cut version of the game, even before it's feature complete, the earlier we get the feedback we need to make the game better. So that being said, our alpha phases, our beta phases are about testing. It's not about early access, and we expect that when people do come into the alpha and beta, that they're doing so in order to provide that feedback, to find bugs, and to let us actually make a better product. So I'm hoping that people are pleasantly surprised by how early we let them in. I also hope they're understanding that it's going to be rougher than what they might be used to in a kind of an alpha state, because we want them in early.
Yeah, that's always a problem I've seen with a lot of times with alphas and betas. People hop in and the chat is just scrolling so quickly with people complaining, this doesn't have this, you promised this. It's like, you're testing a game, you're not playing it. Just get over yourself, please. I've been doing beta testing stuff since I was, 9 or 10 years old because I lied on a form to Sierra when I was a kid, and I've never understood why people get so confused. But because the word testing is right there, you know. But hey, you know, hopefully people are able to provide good feedback. Hopefully you get a majority of people who are actually willing to work with it when that time comes along. That being said, you know, before we tie this up, is there any other final notes you'd like to mention, or any final things you'd like to discuss?
No. I mean, we covered most of the points. I think that, I certainly want people to check us out. Take a look at our Kickstarter. Back us if they're interested in it. Obviously, if they're not, then don't worry about it. We also did put ourselves on Steam Greenlight the other day. We're moving up on the Steam Greenlight chart quite rapidly. There's a massive community of people there as well. We are not looking to do Steam Early Access. We're solely using Steam at this point as a way to get Chronicles of Elyria in front of a larger audience, to get more feedback from players, as well as to explore the possibility of putting it for sale on Steam at some point in the future. But that being said, at this point, it's really just about getting it in front of another larger community and getting feedback from more people, because we're at that stage now where the more people who see it, the more feedback we get, the earlier we are, the opportunity we have to make changes to make the game better, the better it is for everybody. When we tell people that, usually though, they grip their chair real tightly and they go, "Oh my God, they're gonna start making changes because everybody wants changes." That also doesn't tend to happen with us very often. Chronicles of Elyria is really a passion project for us. We like to think of it as our art. It's not just a game; it's our art form, and nobody can really tell you what your art looks like. It's something that you define yourself. It's a personal style, and so while we do want people to come in and take a look at our art periodically and let us know whether or not we're colorblind or not, or whether we're seeing the game completely differently than everybody else is, our goal is really to stay true to our vision and just to kind of make sure that our vision is what people are seeing, but not to change our vision, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. I think it makes a lot of sense. So, well, I've already said during this, I broke the professional barrier by saying how excited I am about this game, and that is a simple fact. I'm so excited about this game that the same day that I sent in a PR request to the email, I also sent in a resume to the jobs email, because that was where my brain was. I was so excited about the game, laying in bed. I think I read the forums like 5 hours that night before I went to bed, because I wanted to know everything about this game. So thank you very much for chatting with me for quite a bit of time now. So people can find Chronicles of Elyria. It's on Kickstarter. There's it's chroniclesofelyria.com. You're under Facebook. You're on all the social media, Soulbound Studios. All right. Well, again, Jeromy, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to chatting with you more, because, as I said, I wrote more notes for this interview than almost any to date. So,
well, thanks, Josh. It was a pleasure talking with you guys.
Absolute pleasure. You have a nice rest of your day, and preemptive congratulations on hitting the goal.
Thank you.
All right. You have a lovely night.
Yep. You too.